Hello. In this brief video, I'm going to be explaining what Git and Fork is, why it's useful, and a couple of tips and tricks I've learned, as well as like how to set it up and stuff. It's a shame because a lot of people in our major don't know how to use Git when it's a really useful tool for game designers. It's a program that lets you manage changes, and separate them when you're working on one project with a lot of people. And considering our job is literally to work on a single game with multiple people, it's a really useful tool to keep track of what's being put into the game and make sure like no conflicts are happening to making the game as efficient as possible. So yeah, let's get started. So you're going to go to gitfork.com and you're going to download Fork. There's a couple other programs like Git programs, but Fork is what we use in class, and Fork is I don't know, it's a really good program that I'm going to be explaining how to use it. You can download it on Mac or Windows here. You shouldn't need to pay any money or like log in or anything. You just download it, install it, and it should look something like this when you open it. You can change the appearance of its like light or dark mode by going here to appearance. I like dark mode because it's easier on my eyes. And yeah, so first things first, we're going to need to log in with our accounts. So while Fork doesn't have an account, platforms that use Git like GitLab or GitHub will. So I'm going, so you're going to click File, Accounts, and here you'll have a list of accounts that you've logged in. You shouldn't have any right now. You're going to click this plus, and here you have like Bitbucket, Git, GitHub, GitLab. Log in with everything the accounts you have, and if you don't have those accounts, just go to the websites and make one. For the sake of this video, we're going to be using GitLab because that's what we use in class and that's what I'm familiar with. But other stuff like GitHub is also used. When you log in, it should take you to the website, and then your account should start appearing here. Then you should be good to go. Cool. So, yeah, before we continue, we're going to need to set up an SSH key. So an SSH key is basically authentication for your computer to use Git on different websites and stuff. So it's super easy to set up, but they are confidential, so you won't be able to see mine. But you're going to click File, Configure SSH Keys here. Then your SSH keys will appear here. If you don't have any, you're going to need to make one, obviously. You're going to click plus down here, new SSH key, and you're going to give it a name. So, for example, Kyle's test SSH key. And then it's not going to work because I already have one named that for here. And then you give the email you're using for your account. There we go. You're going to click generate, and then it's going to appear on this list. Click on it, and then click copy to keyboard. Click copy to clipboard where it says public key or below public key. Yeah, and then you're going to okay. So now that you have the copied, you're going to go to your Git platform. In this case, we're using GitLab. If you haven't, like I said, you should already have an account made by now. But if you didn't, go make an account. And then when you're all logged in and stuff, click this. Click Edit Profile, and then SSH Keys down here. And you're going to click Add New Key in the top right. You're going to paste your key, and then you can give your key a new name. So like Kyle's test SSH key, and then you can even give it like an expiration date or whatever. And then add key, and then it should appear in here. Right? And if you click SSH Keys again, you can see the key is there. And you can also remove keys or revoke keys that you may have like worked with in the past or whatever that you don't use anymore. Now that that's set up, I'm gonna click that. You don't need it anymore. Now you're able to actually use Fork because now you're all authenticated and you have your accounts and stuff. So now we're gonna make a repository. So a repository is basically just a folder that keeps track of whatever's in that folder and the changes made to that. So if I have a Unity project, I'll put it in my repository, and then anytime I make changes to that Unity project, I can see the changes happen in Fork. That's the whole point of Git, is to make sure you keep track of your changes. That way you can determine whether to push them or merge them with other changes people have made. So we're going to make a repository. You're going to click this little plus icon in the top left, New Project Repository, and then you're going to click Create Blank Project. I'll name this Test Repo, for example. You can change the URL and stuff, which is useful. So that way you just give someone this URL, and it'll bring you to the repository. You have private and public. I'm going to use this private, for example, And you can even initialize it with a README, which is really useful because READMEs keep track important data of your repository, and it's good because it'll tell you if you cloned it or not, if the README is in your folder. So create project, and then boom. So now this is set up. This will show all the files we have in our repository as we update it, but we need to actually clone it. And what cloning means is basically just saying we're going to bring this file into our computer, and we're going to keep track of it now. So yeah, we're going to click code here, and there's two options. There's clone with SSH and clone with HTTPS. Now both of these should work, but if one of them doesn't work, you can just use the other one, and that one should work. For example, I'll use HTTPS because SSH doesn't really work with me for some reason. I'm going to click fork. I'm going to click file, clone, and it should already paste it there, but if it didn't, make sure you copy it from the this, and then you're going to paste it into a repository URL, and it should say HTTPS or SSH, whatever you're using. Click test connection to make sure it works, and then you're going to assign it a folder, which is basically where it's going to appear. For example, I like using my desktop, so I'm going to have it on desktop. And then you can even name the folder. This is just the name, so this will be called test repo, and then click clone. And it should open it up. And now our repository is set up. So here, just show you it works. I go to my desktop, open test repo. There it is. README is there. You know it cloned properly if your README is there. And also, so this Git folder won't appear unless you have hidden folders enabled. Don't worry about that. But yeah, if README is there, it means your repository cloned because you basically copy the changes of the repo into your computer, which now means you have the README file. Cool. So yeah, just a quick overview of what all this stuff is. This is where all your changes will appear. For example, initial commit basically means the first commit that made this repository. Then we have branches in here. Branches are basically whatever different. So what a branch is basically a way to keep track of your individual changes. So main here will be the main project, and then I will make my own branch by clicking new branch, naming it Kyle's branch. And I can push this, and now I have my own branch, and whatever changes I will make will stay to Kyle's branch, while main will stay behind. And later I can tell main, hey, merge with my changes. That way we're all up to date. And then other people can also work on their own branches. So if, for example, I have an artist, I'll have a artist branch. If I have a programmer, I'll have a programmer branch. And then later those branches will merge into main to make sure the project is completely up to date, and also to make sure no conflicts happen. Branches are really important and underused by a lot of students, I think, when they're literally the best way to keep merge conflicts from happening, basically, because you're all working on your own stuff. If you're all working on one branch, then there's a high chance that one of you is going to work on the same thing as someone else, and then the changes are going to get overwritten, and that's no fun. So make sure you remember, make a new branch by right-clicking, new branch, enter the branch name, and then check out after create. Because checking out basically says, I have this as my current branch. And you know that that's your current branch by having a check mark next to the branch name. If you want to ever check out another branch, you go here, which says branches, and then double-click whatever branch you want to check out. If a branch isn't showing up here, it's probably in a remote. Click origin, and then here, and you'll see all of the branches that may appear in the file. So you might have like artist, programmer, and stuff. Even if they're not on your computer, they will appear here because they have remote branches. Cool. Now that's set up. Yeah, so now we have our own branch. Let me explain what pushing, pulling, and fetching are. So fetching, which means up here, make sure you click fetch all remotes. Basically says, give me all the changes that someone else has made. Now obviously there aren't going to be any changes, so they're not going to show up here. But if someone else was working on something and it wasn't on your computer, click fetch, and it's going to search the internet for all the people, or search the repository from online to see the other changes people have made that were working on this project. So make sure you do that frequently. That way you have the latest changes from other people. Pulling is basically a way to merge changes from other people. So people were working on Kyle's branch, or rather people were working on main, and I'm on Kyle's branch. I can pull from main, and it will merge it into Kyle's branch, which is really useful for getting the latest changes from something. And then last, pushing is basically saying whatever changes I have stored right now or committed, I want those to go online so other people can see them. It's basically saying make sure those changes get pushed to the repository and are tracked, which I'll explain how that works in a minute. So that's done. Real quick, just some other things I want to talk about. See how it says Kyle Fury here? If it doesn't say your name, you can click File, Preferences, Git, and you can change like your name, your email, and then you even change your avatar if you go to this website and set that up. You change light mode and dark mode at the top right here, so light, dark, if you're interested in that. There's also other like stuff like vertical or horizontal. And then one more thing is that, like I said, Git is actually a command line interface. So Git basically looks like this. You just enter commands like git, push, or whatever. But fork is a nice way because it takes that command line interface and makes it a graphical user interface. So instead of entering commands, you have these nice buttons here. You have all these like all the branches and stuff on this nice little list. It makes it a lot easier for people who aren't familiar with code to look at and use. That's why I like using fork over just normal Git, but it's up to you whether you prefer that. It's just for beginners, it's generally better to use fork, I believe. And this is if you ever need to open the console, if you're ever doing like advanced stuff, or need to do a command that's not in fork for some reason, you can click console in the top right here and enter your command. But that's not really important. But it's not really important for you guys. It's just important that you know how to do that in case you ever need to for some reason in the future. Cool. Now if we click over here, click local changes. This is basically where you'll see all your changes when they're made. So if I open up my test repo and I make a new file, let's just say I make a new text document and I name it change. That change is going to appear here. And it's going to appear with a green mark. That basically means this was added to my thing. So if I stage that change, which basically means I'm saving that change for later, and I go back and I like rename this, or I don't rename this. Let's say I go into this change. I say hello world. I save. Now you'll see here change is yellow because now I added hello world to the text. And that's really useful for programmers because we just basically program on text documents. So it literally keeps track of each individual line and what that was changed in your text documents. So if you have two people working on the same text document, it will just merge them by adding the text document like lines together and stuff, which can be really useful if you're working on the same like script or whatever. But yellow means modified, green means you added something, and likewise, if I delete this, red means I deleted it. If I ever made a change that I don't want to keep, I can click on it and I can click delete, which will discard that change. And now if I go back to my repository, it discarded me deleting it, which basically means it added it back. So now that I made this change, let's say I'm done making my changes to my code and I want to push that. I can give it a name. So I'll say first commit, and I will commit that file. Now that basically means it's going to show up here, my all commits, it's going to show up here, and it's going to have this blue dot next to it, which means it's ready to be pushed, but it's not pushed yet. So other people online won't see that, but it's ready to get pushed. The thing is, let's say I made a mistake and I want to go back and change that. I can click amend, and then it will show my changes here. And I can make whatever changes I need, and then click amend again, and it will basically just modify that commit before it's pushed. Now, like I said, this commit isn't been put online. I can easily put it online by clicking push. And I hit push. I make sure I'm on the right stuff. I'm Kyle's branch right now. I'm going to default. I'm going to push. And there we go. Now, this means that my changes are online. People can see them. And I'm also like Kyle's branch is up to date with this. So if someone else was to go to Kyle's branch, they would have these changes basically. Let's say I make another branch though real quick. We'll say Kyle's branch 2. Now Kyle's branch 2 is going to be down here, which means if I open up my repository, I don't have my change file. I can pull the changes. Oh no, I can't. I have to push first. Sorry. Whenever you make a new branch, make sure you click push. Okay, cool. I can pull the changes from Kyle's branch, which will now give me the change file. But let's say I want to go back to main. I can use something called resetting. So if I right click this and click reset Kyle branch 2 to here, there's three options. There's soft, medium, mixed, and hard. So mixed is what often people will prefer, because what this basically means is that I'm going to go back to this spot, but I'm not going to change whatever I have on my computer. So in this case, if I reset mixed, I go to my local changes, I'm back here, and this is considered a change because my Kyle's branch 2 is here before I actually added the change, so it thinks it's a new change. But if I were to right-click this and then reset to hard, it's just gonna put me back up there like I was never there in the first place. So I have changed, and now my branch is right there. There's no changes anymore because I'm completely up to date. So yeah, when you don't have any changes, you're up to date. When you have changes, you're not up to date. That's really important to know because if you're ever wondering why you don't have the latest changes, check your local changes. If those files are there, it likely means you're not up to date with wherever your branch is at. Yeah, so that's a bit confusing. This stuff gets confusing until you start using it, but it's really important to know this stuff because you don't want to lose your hard work, basically. Yeah, so I want to show you one last thing, and that is merging, basically. So I'm gonna make an text document. Excuse me. Change 2. Yeah, and I'm gonna push this change 2. I'm gonna say second commit. It's better. You guys really should name your commits better though. You don't want to like name it first commit, second commit. You want to make sure what you're talking about is directly reflected in your changes. That way, when other people see this, they know exactly what you did, basically. So now Kyle's branch 2 is ahead of Kyle's branch 1. But if I go back to Kyle's branch 1, what if I want Kyle's branch 2 with me? I can right click and click merge into Kyle's branch. And basically it's going to say, I'm going to grab all the changes that were in this branch, I'm going to pull them back into my branch. It's a little bit different than pull because you can actually control what gets changed. So right now there's not going to be any conflicts. Meaning, if I click merge, there's nothing bad's going to happen. Nothing is going to be changed. Nothing that I did is going to be changed. I'm literally only getting new changes. But if I were to work on someone else's stuff by accident, there might be merge conflicts. And in order to fix those, it's going to be ask me, okay, which files do I want? Do I want this changed or do I want this changed? And I can pick which one I want based on whatever's like more recent or depending on who worked on what. Unless you pick out one. So when it says this little green arrow, it means that those changes are not going to have any conflicts. So when I merge this and I push, Kyle's branch 2 is now where Kyle's branch 1 is now with Kyle's branch 2, and now I have change 1 and change 2. Cool. Now the last thing I want to do is, let's say you made a mistake or whatever. There's one thing I like to do is I can force push. So let's say I want to amend my last commit. Which will give me this little warning sign saying amending commit that has already been pushed. Yeah, so let's say I add a new change. I name it change 3. And I want to add this to my last commit. And the problem with this is it's going to cause a branch because it's like, well, your last commit isn't the same as the last commit. So this is actually a problem. You're behind. If I push this, it's going to give me this weird error. One of the things you can do, which can be dangerous if you're not careful with it, is you can force push. So if I need to undo changes like last minute, and you know what you have is what you want to keep, you can push and then click force push, which will basically say ignore the problems I'm having and just push it. But you'll see here now we have it divided again because my second commit is different than Kyle's branch 2's second commit. So these actually are different. And that's why there's this little branch icon. And there will always be these branch icons whenever two commits have different stuff. But I can easily merge into Kyle's branch. And now I push this. It'll say merge branch Kyle branch 2 into Kyle's branch. And now I have all three changes again. Cool. There's one more small but really important thing I forgot to mention. It's called Git Ignore. So one of the biggest downsides of Git, or not downsides, but weaknesses, is that Git cannot store very large files very easily. That's why it's not really good with artists, because artists tend to have really big files. Git will sometimes give you an error if you try pushing a really big file, because it's not supposed to be pushing big files. So when you're working on a project, specifically like a Unity project or an Unreal project, you might get a lot of junk files that you don't actually need, that just waste space and can sometimes cause you problems later in the future. So we have this useful thing called Git Ignore, which is super easy to add to your files, that will basically say, hey, don't push any of these changes, or rather don't look at any of these changes in these files. So here I have a Unity project that I staged, and oftentimes you're going to get rid of library logs or user settings. Generally, when you open a project and stuff gets changed, like for example temp here, when stuff like that gets changed, when you opened a project and didn't do anything, that stuff should be ignored, because those files are just temporary and generally don't need to be added to the repository. You can do that. You can simply ignore files by right-clicking the file and clicking Ignore, and then ignore files, all files in this. And then it'll say My Project Library, and it creates a directory, and then it will create a Git Ignore. And in this Git Ignore, you have here basically a just small text file that has the list of whatever folders you want to ignore. Be really careful not to ignore something that's really important, because then when you push that Git Ignore, any changes you make to that file will never appear again. So if you accidentally lose the project and try to recover it from the repository, folders that are really important that are ignored will not come back to you. And that's a really big problem if you're not saving the changes that are really important to your project. But generally, instead of manually ignoring their different files by right-clicking, clicking ignore all files, you will find a predefined Git Ignore by someone who knows a bit more about it than you do. For example, just looking up Unity Git Ignore, you can find this nice little collection of Git Ignores on GitHub, made by this guy named B. Dougie. And this is a really good Git Ignore. You just kind of throw it into your Unity project. That's not it. You just throw it into your Unity project. For example, I right-click here, Show from File Explorer, and it will open up my Unity project here, and I can just throw that Git Ignore into these files, and it will ignore the right stuff. And then when I stage these ignored files, it won't actually show up what I ignored. Notice how I don't know, like what I had ignored here, library and user settings don't appear here anymore. So if I ignore logs, ignore all files and logs, logs goes away and in comes the Git Ignore. So now anything in that logs file will go away and never show up again, and therefore it won't occupy space. So make sure to use Git Ignore, because they can really help your projects stay clean, I guess. And also it will keep you from having files that may be really large in your project, which will prevent you from pushing. If you ever have to push a large file, there's something called large file storage, like LFS right here, but and you can like track files in those folders. That way they can get pushed. It's like the alternate a Git Ignore will let you push big files. So Git Ignore ignores files, and large file storage lets you push large files. And they're really useful tools that especially us as game designers should definitely know how to use. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This is some of the most basic stuff about Git, and some of the most useful stuff as well. Just simply being able to control your changes, branch your changes, and then merge your changes is a very powerful tool in the game design industry. So when you're working on your class assignments or working on projects with friends, really consider using Git, because it's just a really useful tool, and I think the more you use it, the more you'll learn from it. And like I said, there's always documentation on Git and stuff. It's not the same as, may not be the same as Fork, but if you ever have questions, just Google it. You should be able to find whatever you need. But I hope this video was helpful to you guys. And if you ever have any questions, just let me know, or let someone that is more experienced with Git know, and they can hopefully help you, because yeah, it's a really cool tool. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a great night.